Okay, friends, we are going to walk through the terminal, which is always challenging, but can be really fun. Let me actually, I'm just going to clear this and we're just going to start from the beginning. Let's terminate this. So one of the ways that we can navigate through our program is by actually just going to folders, right? And I have multiple monitors, so all my folders are on a different screen, but you guys obviously have seen the screen before where you have like these folders right here and you just double click on it. That's a graphical user interface, also called like a GUI, right? And so it is the ability to sort of go in and navigate through visualization, which is awesome. And that's great. But as you get into the industry and as you actually get into developing, especially with, I mean, doesn't matter if you're on premise or if you're in the cloud, anytime you're dealing with a sort of database or you're dealing with hosting something on the cloud, going through AWS and starting an EC2 instance, anytime you're dealing with that, you're going to have to use your command prompt or your terminal or sort of however, whichever one you want to use, Git bash, it doesn't matter, or you're going to have to get familiar with using that. And whenever you log into an AWS EC2 instance, which an EC2 instance, we'll talk about this in like week 6. All an EC2 instance is whenever we run a server on our computer, that's just called a local server. What the cloud is really a building of a bunch of servers that we can say, let's put our code on this and it runs, similar to, like, you can think about it just having a ton of laptops that are really, really, really powerful, right? So that's what, like in the cloud perspective, that's what a server is. And Amazon just calls theirs an EC2 instance. Now Azure, so Microsoft calls theirs a virtual machine, and I haven't really worked with Google cloud provider, but they all have this sort of the same thing. And the reason that this is important is anytime you're going to do something in that, whenever you spin up a server, you have to use the command prompt. They do not have a GUI. They do not have, although it'd be super nice, to where you could just go and click and do a bunch of things. And so getting used to and familiar with the terminal is going to be really important. I say terminal because I'm a Mac person. It might be command prompt if you're on Windows or Linux, whatever you have. So here's the terminal. I'm just going to do this. I think that's probably big enough. So here is the terminal, right? And so this is whenever I open it up, this is where I'm currently located, right? This is the heart of my machine. Now, and on Windows, it can be a little bit different. Gray, do you have a Windows or a Mac?
I have both.
Okay. If you know the, most of these are the same, but if you know, Gray, something that is different on Windows, if you don't mind just putting that in the chat, just saying for Windows, that'd be awesome. So here I am, right? And this is saying this on the left shows my current location. And so if I say something like LS, what LS for me, and I believe that is dir or something, I believe it's dir for, yep, yes. Thanks, Gray. LS tells me, okay, what do I currently have access to? You can sort of think about it if, you know, have you ever seen those Russian dolls where it's like a doll and then inside of a doll and inside of a doll and inside of a doll, right? So you can only see the big doll. And then once you open it up, then you have access to the next thing. Sort of operates the same way. You can think of this also as all the folders you have on the side, right? You don't know what's in it, but you see the visual of just the folder. Same sort of thing happens. And because where I'm currently at, here is what I have access to. I have access to applications, Creative Cloud files, my desktop, which is going to be typically your most, like where you typically go. Downloads, I have something called Hello World. That's probably a mistake on my end. I have zero idea what that is. Personal website, I got projects and PyCharm or interview test or all kinds of different things, right? A ton of different areas I can go. So if I wanted to go to my desktop, because that's really where you're going to start. Most of the time, you're going to start at desktop. So if I wanted to, these are called a directory. So we know them as folders. And just like Gray put in the chat, they're also a folder is called a directory. And so what I want to do, if I want to go to desktop, I'm going to say CD. CD stands for change directory, right? I want to go into this. And here, I'm going to say desktop. Now notice, if I say this, it is case sensitive. So if I say this, it's going to give me, oh, I guess this one is okay. Do I have a lowercase desktop? Nope. So most of the time it is case sensitive. I'm assuming maybe desktop is not. If I wanted to go back just to make sure that I'm in the right one, I do CD dot dot. Dot dot will take me back one level. And these all go to just like by one level. And I'll show you in a bit how you can go more and more. So what I want to say is CD desktop. Now, what's nice about it is you only have to type sort of all the way up to the uniqueness, if you will. And I'll show you what I mean by that. If I say D, right, CD D, well, that could be desktop, it could be documents, it could be downloads. Now, if I press tab anytime, what it's telling me is, okay, I don't know what D means because it could be all three of these things. Well, if I say O and tab, it takes it down to these two, but I want to go to desktop, and we know that if I do DE, that's unique, right? There's nothing else with DE. So if I do this and I press tab, it'll auto complete it for me. Cool. So once I do this and I press enter, then I will see that I am now in the desktop. So if I run this LS again, or dir for dir on Windows, now I have different access, right? I'm no longer here. I'm now within my desktop, and here are the things that are on my desktop. Here's all the different environments, or, Coding Dojo, my EC2 keys, which is not a great thing to have on your desktop, but alas, here we are. My Alaska mileage from flying, like I have a whole bunch of stuff. And here I want to go into my Coding Dojo. So what I want to do is, can anybody tell me, what am I going to type if I want to enter into my Coding Dojo folder? What am I going to type? You guys can come off mute. Yep, exactly, Robert. So I'm going to say CD, and then I'm going to say coding. Now, one thing to notice is when we're dealing with this, we have to, if we just did the spaces, it's going to mess up, but this is representative of the spaces to allow for a space. So just be aware of that. If you guys ever dealt with Java and had like a space in a folder name and it sort of messed you up, that is often a thing. So you can see I sort of learned and started putting snake case or doing different things there. But because I already have spaces, I want to do that. Cool. Now, again, if I want to see what is in my directory, what is something I can type if I'm on Mac? Exactly. We can type ls, right? So now if I type ls, I see, oh, okay, I have examples I have exam wireframes. I've got MERN training. I've got web development. I've got a whole bunch of stuff. So what I can do is I know I want to get into instruction CD. So I'm going to say CD, instruction CD. Now notice I have a space, or sorry, a slash, and then it kind of auto populates. If I press tab again, instead of me having to say CD every single time, then what I can do is just keep adding on. If I know sort of the pathway, oftentimes when you see something, if you guys ever, especially if you're on Windows and you know what an environment variable is, right? And you saw the pathway to where that leads, same sort of thing. So I know that I want to go to Feb 23. So instead of me having to say CD instruction, CD, enter, okay, CD Feb, I can actually just write that in the same line. And then now I'm in there. And if I even wanted to go further, we're in week 1, perfect. And it auto-populated with week 1 because I only have one thing in there. So it's saying that that's the only thing it could be. If I had multiple, it would have done the same thing. It would have given me the list. I can say lecture, and now you can see that I need to be unique. So I can say 2. And here you can now see that I went all the way to lecture 2, and I can say ls, and we see class overview, and we see main.js. Here are the files within that. Now, let's say I wanted to get back to Feb MERN. Knowing what we know now, can anybody tell me how would I get back to that? Great job, Bear. Great job, Chris. What if I wanted to get back to it in one line? If I just do CD dot dot, where's that going to take me? Yeah, good job, Robert. So I'm going to say CD dot dot slash dot dot. So if I say CD dot dot, that takes me to week 1. If I say slash, it's sort of like I'm going the opposite, right? Now I'm going back, and then because I do another dot dot, it takes me back to February 23 MERN. And alas, here we are. Cool. So now I've done that. I have access in Feb 23 MERN. Let's go ahead and create a new folder. So I'm going to say mkdir. So that is make a directory. And I want to just go ahead and make week 2. We're not there yet, but I'm going to go ahead and make it. So if I say this, well, great. You can see that it now, if I say ls, I now have week 2 available. I can cd into week 2 and see that there's nothing there, but I can create a new folder by saying something like this, kdir lecture 1 cd, and I'll show you a little trick after this. Instead of having to do make dir and then cd, and say lecture 1. And then now, kind of pro tip, does anybody know how to make, if I wanted to make a class overview markdown file, does anybody know how I could do that? Anybody know the command for that? Yeah, great job, Kelsey. It is, it's touch. So if I want to make a new file, all I say is touch, space, and then the file name. So I'm going to say class overview.md. Great. Now, if I say ls, I have this. Cool. Now, there is a tip also, just coming from the terminal, that if you're on Windows, it automatically happens. If you're not on Windows, then you have to set it up, and I'll show you how to do that right now. But let's say I have this folder, right? I'm still within this folder, and I want to start. Let's actually go ahead and say touch main.js. Cool. So now if I say this, I've got multiple. If I wanted to jump into VS Code, I could go into VS Code and upload my folder. Or if I know how to navigate, I can just say, I can navigate to the folder I want to open. And then I say code space dot. And space dot means everything within this folder. If I would have just said code space main.js, it'll just pull up main.js and it will not pull this up. But if I say space dot, that means I want the entire folder. Now, when I do that, we'll see. You see that it's opening VS Code. And it opens up all of my files here. So you can see that as I navigate and I'm doing this, I can open it up. Now, by default on Mac and Linux, it doesn't do that. So all I have to do is I say Command Shift P, and it brings this guy up right here. All I need to do is you can just type path. And then once you click this shell command, install code command in path, then once that clicks, cool, it's successfully installed. Now, if you were to redo your terminal so that way it has the most up-to-date version, then you could do code and now you can open up for that. Somebody asked, can we do mkdir and touch in the same command? Yeah, so that's what I'll get to here in a great question, Chris. Any questions on what we're doing right now? Any questions on this? It's sort of the basic stuff. You just put a 1 if this makes sense, put a 0 if it does not. Great. Cool. So this is pretty basic, but this is really all you'll need, even for the majority of the class. If you try for the black belt, we will actually give you the commands. So it's not like you have to do that on your own. But we will, being familiar and understanding what they are, there's a ton of different things you can do. But just being familiar with at least these can help you. Now, bringing up what Chris said, sometimes doing this stuff, you'll find yourself doing repetitive things. For example, mkdir lecture 1 and then CDing into that lecture is something that, man, I did all the time. And somebody showed this to me and it sort of blew my mind. So I'm going to say edit. Now, edit for me is different than, it's not going to mean anything for you, but I'll tell you what that means in a second. So whenever I say edit, it's going to bring up this thing right here. Let me get this. Cool. Now, what that means is you can create, and this is for a Mac, and then I'll find an article that will do Windows as well. But for Mac, it's a ZSHRC. I believe for Windows, it's bash RC. But this is a document that you can create pathways and basically shortcuts. And so for me, when I typed edit, this is the command that it ran. When I typed edit, this is the command that it ran. So it ran this open .zhsrc. It opens up this file. And now you can see that I've got a ton of different things that I wanted to do. For instance, if I wanted to do sometimes, or back in the day with Mac, if you wanted to do Python, if you were running like a file, you'd have to say Python 3 because it had Python 2 built onto it. So it didn't know which Python it would default to Python 2. It was real pain. So I just created an alias called Pi. And so what this is us creating these things called aliases. And what an alias will do is allow you to create basically a variable. So your sort of shortcut word, and then put whatever you need to do in there. So we'll start kind of basic at the beginning. When I say pi, it will do Python equals or Python 3, right? And so now instead of having to type Python 3, I can just type pi, and then it does the same thing for me, right? It sort of replaces that. You can get pretty into this, like you can do a lot of stuff with this. And I even probably am just like barely touching like the beginning. But you can do a ton of different things. Like here, if I had a data science environment that I wanted to do, I could just run this. Instead of having to type this, I just ran ds-env or pyenv, and it ran my Django environment. So instead of having to run this entire thing and navigating, I just had to run this and it did it for me. Any questions on this? Let me look up to see if there's a. Trying to find a file for Windows. Oh yeah, add aliases. So I'm going to put this in the chat. This is for Microsoft. That's for Windows.
For if you're a Windows, I'm gonna put in a chat. So how to create a file. And FYI, if you are on Windows, you can get bash commands. You can download bash. Or use commander, one or two, if you want. But yeah, but that would be how you would do it for a command. I feel like they're all mixed up in my head. I think, but anyone wants to know that, that's there.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay, so now going even further, going to Chris's question. You can also create functions. And this is really where, in my opinion, the power is I created this function called mkcd. I probably honestly use this function every single day. And all it is a function. Here's my function name is mkcd, which for me was make a directory and then cd into it. And then here you can see that you don't pass anything in there. So you don't put any sort of like parameters that it should expect. You just leave it empty. Then you have your curly bracket. And you say, okay, what do you want it to do? And this is a step-by-step piece where you say, okay, first I want you to make a directory. And notice whenever I say $1, that is representative, and it has to be $1, representative of the first parameter that you pass in. You can pass in 5 of them, right? What it will do is it'll just take this first one and it'll make a directory with that first parameter that you pass in. Then what it will do after that's done is it will cd into that parameter. So it'll run, let's say I make mkcd of week 3. First, it's going to make a directory called week 3. Then it's going to cd into to week 3. So let's actually see how that works. So if I go back, now I'm in week 2. Here, now, instead of having to say mkdir lecture 1 or lecture 3, because we're going to do, we're going to do week 3. But instead of having to say, you know, mkdir and then cd. I just do mkcd lecture or, ooh, almost messed up there. Week 3. Now, when I click this, you can see that I'm in week 3. It creates the directory and then it automatically navigates into that, which is pretty sweet. Then you can take it even a step further, just like Chris was asking. And you can do a whole bunch of stuff. Like if you find yourself, like for me, for example, I think I have one in here. Yeah, so I was always creating the same thing for every application or every class I was teaching. And so I just created a function called Django temp that calls pyenv, which you can call your other values. It also ran Django admin startup and then my project that I passed in. So this is running. You'll see that we'll get to a point, and today we're going to talk about how do you start a React app. We're going to create our first React app, but you could, in theory, if you knew that you were going to do this over and over and over again, you could just create a function and you just do it one time, one line, you pass in all the information you need, and then it will create the entire thing for you and navigate into it. And then you could even say code, and then it'll create everything and it'll open it up for you. So you can, you can do within this, again, you can use any of the tools that we talked about. You can use, obviously there's a lot more. You can remove, you can delete, you can do a whole bunch of stuff. But this allows you to kind of make shortcuts, if you will, instead of having to do, like this was a great example of every day. And whenever I taught Python, I had to write a daily agenda, what I now call class overview, same. And then I create a Python file. And so now instead of having to do all of these things, I just write pytemp. And I'll show you how that works. Now, if I say pytemp, what are the values I need? Oh, I didn't need anything because it just creates that. So if I say pytemp, automatically came, created that, created my daily agenda, and created my Python file. And it'll open it up within my VS Code. Any questions on that? How are we feeling on that?
I've got one.
Yeah.
On the one where you pass in the custom functions where it's $1. Each one of those is $1. So is that, I'm going to say that they're all going to be named the exact same thing, or are they going to be like it's, say, I don't know, week 1? Okay, so that one's 2.
Yeah.
So basic. So
yeah, so great question. So $1 is equivalent to whatever's the thing that I pass in. So we'll actually just
your
use
first
one of these.
parameter.
Yeah, so the first parameter. So I mean, even I'll just do this one and I'll show you sort of what happens here. Let's even try it. I haven't used Django in a long time. So let's do, what is it called? Oops. Let's go and get rid of that. It's called Django temp, and then I need to pass in 2 things. So I'm going to say main and then app. So I'm going to say Django temp main app. No such file. No. I got rid of my Django environment, so it couldn't start my environment, but you can see that when it sets it up, number 2 is what I wanted to create, this main piece right here. And then number 1, the new one is right here. And so I created this, both of these folders. And this is how it is set up, based on how you would set up like a Django project, similar to, again, to how we're going to do React today. I just don't have a React one.
And then you didn't have to put those in parentheses either.
I'm sorry?
You didn't have to put those in parentheses.
Nope. Nope, you don't.
Because I wasn't sure, because if you've got the parentheses on the function, but that's possibly just because it is a function.
Sure.
So
Well,
yeah,
great question. So I'll actually create a function we're gonna call React starter. And let's do this. This is a little sneak peek of what we're gonna do today. And we're going to say npx create react app +n1. Cool. So now if I say React starter, let me get out of this. And I CD into my desktop. I go into Coding Dojo, I go into instruction, I go into February 23. And then let's say I'm gonna go into week 3. Now, if I just say React starter, it's gonna take forever, but we'll see. You specify the product directory.
It needs a name.
You gave it a name, no? Oh, yeah. Whoops. React starter, and then I have to pass it a name. So then we'll just say first React. Yeah, you're right. I forgot to pass it in. So you don't have to do anything other than this is the parameter you're passing through. And then obviously if you do a space and then do another one, that would be number 2. And if you, I mean, you could have, no short supply of how many you wanted to pass in.
Hey, Will,
Mhm.
just a question. For max, the .zshrc, is that something like you create, like what would be the equivalent for Windows, I guess?
I believe it's Bash. It used to be Bash on it used to be Bash on Mac, then they moved to ZSH. I sent a article in the
wait,
chat.
oh, that's the terminal? I'm sorry. That's your terminal?
This?
No, that, well,
No,
wait.
this is a file. This is just a
Okay.
file on my
Yeah,
computer.
this one.
Yeah, so this is what I would have run in my terminal. But I sent a article for Windows on how to get
Oh.
aliases started.
All right.
You'll have to, yeah, it's a so this is create bash equivalent in Windows. So you can create a batch file that does this. So here's another
I found it.
Stack Overflow.
Thank you. I'll give it to this. Well, the other students don't have it, so I still didn't ask, so I just want to make sure.
Yeah, great question. Yeah, so this is just a ZSHRC, and that's because that's exactly what Mac uses. But there's different options. You can easily create one in Windows with a simple search. It'll help you if you ask. Let's see. Let's use our trusty friend. How to create aliases in alias in Windows command prompt. Let's see if it can give us an answer. Maybe it can't. Maybe we'll stump the AI. I should do dark mode. I fully understand that. I lack character apparently.
What if they don't have dark mode?
Okay, so we open it, press this guy. And I'll just copy and paste this for you. You can put that in the chat.
Oh, so they're doing it in Notepad. Okay.
Yeah, it's just got to be a file that you can relate to.
Oh, okay. That makes sense. That makes sense because it was like, for Windows it'll be a .txt. Just so y'all know.
There you go. I'll put this in
The
our chat.
Discord. The Discord. Or in here. I'll put it in the Discord.
Somebody asked, do they typically have company-wide aliases to work from, or is it typically personal preference? It's personal preference. I've never ever had, unfortunately, I've never had company aliases, which would have been elite. But oftentimes you're not really creating a ton of things on its own. You know, you're not like, even if you join a company, oftentimes you're not going to be the one who's starting the file and creating the architecture. That's going to be sort of your senior dev, your data or your cloud architecture person, and your data scientist or your data architecture person who's sort of setting it up. And you'll just be logging in and kind of adding on to either the monolithic or the component based code. Great question though, Chris. So it's for me, it's more of things that I use all the time. So, I mean, even just like this, right? Instead of having to run and CD into something and then running files, I can just run this and instead of, it's just lazy typing, if you will. And I can even set it to where it also then runs. So I could say, if I wanted it to automatically run, oops, say something like this, npm start, and it will, I save this, cool, and then I go back and I redo this, it would create another one. But now whenever I run React starter, it'll not only create my React app, and then it'll actually start it up, and it'll also spin it up immediately. So it's just a nice quick little tool. If you find yourself doing the same things over and over and over again, then you can create an alias, and then it just, like, even mkcd is the one I use, like I said, almost every day. Just when I'm doing certain things or when I'm preparing for teaching. So any questions here? Any questions in the chat? Does this make sense?
Yeah, there were a couple questions, just in general. So like aliases are just a way for us to just create shortcuts on our computers, whether Windows or Mac, and it's just to help us to be more efficient. So it's not required for anyone to know at this very moment.
Nope.
You can always review this. So like when you get more comfortable using your keyboard, because there's so many shortcuts there, but this is just a way for you to be efficient more at coding. So you're not required to know this right now. It's going to take you some time to know it and memorize it and just be familiar. But this is just a way for you to be efficient. So, you know, this will be available like way after this class. So you can always like touch base and, you know, go back.
Yeah, and thanks for saying that. If you're feeling overwhelmed by what I just showed, please don't. It's very, you don't have to. Most developers don't even know what aliases are. And maybe that's not true, but a lot of people don't know what aliases are. It is not required. The things that really I would say are important are the first things that we shared, or how do you CD? How do you change your directory? Can you create a folder? That's important. Can you look inside using dir or ls to see sort of where you're at, and just familiarizing yourself with navigating and knowing, okay, if I go from desktop to coding dojo to instruction CD to Feb to week 3, okay, I know, and I can visualize instead of just having to use a GUI. I'm comfortable in doing that in my terminal. If you can do that, then you are good to go. Nothing is going to be really necessary from there.
Yeah, I didn't know about alias, so please don't let no one feel bad.
Yeah.
I didn't know about it. I was like, oh, that's how you do it. Oh, that's how to be fancy in those little techie techie movies or whatever. So don't feel bad or anyone. But so I'm gonna study this a little bit later, and it's good to see as an example. So please, no one feel bad.
Somebody asked a great question of, does the ZSHRC file need to be in a certain place? I believe it does need to be at a pretty high, like a pretty high level, in the sense of, if you looked at mine, it is located in William. Like it's located at William Calhoun, which is sort of the highest level. But so you need to create it. And so it's just in your home directory. So if you set up a terminal, you could just use nano. So I'm looking, let me just pull this over here. You can actually just use nano ZSHRC, then set theme if you want it. They have different themes that you can do too, which is kind of cool. And you can follow this. I'll put this in the chat as well. And so you can set that up. And once you set it up, I believe it does have to be at your sort of home directory level, because that way it has access, like global access. But again, if that was at all confusing, please don't feel like stressed or anything. It is not necessary. It is just a fun tool. Really, this is the only one that if you're going to do anything, this is probably the only one that'll impact you right now. Just instead of saying mkdir and then cd, just mkcd. But again, just knowing how to cd into things, knowing how to navigate the terminal is going to be really important for now, and then just sort of in the future. There's a running joke. There's this thing called Vim. So if you do deploy in your black belt, I would suggest to everybody, we'll talk about this in like week 6, but I'd suggest, even if you're not going for the black belt, if you guys don't know what the black belt is, basically we're going to have our exam. And if you finish it within 5 hours, and you have to have some advanced features on it, but if you finish it within 5 hours, you're also required to host it on an EC2 instance within Amazon. Now that sounds really, really, really stressful. It's not, in regards of it. We give you literally line by line, and I just made sure and went through this past weekend, kind of before this, wanted to make sure that nothing on Amazon has changed. And so I actually went through and deployed just a project, just to make sure everything was working as normal. And it is. I just followed the exact prompts that is on the platform. And then I was able to deploy very easily, had 0 issues. And so, yeah, I mean, that's if you do deploy, I would really encourage everybody to do it, because you're starting to get your feet wet with AWS. But yeah, as long as you can CD and navigate, that's what's going to be important here. Any other questions? Cool. I've got about 10 minutes left, and I thought I would just show you guys very simply how we can upload to Git. And Luis, yes, we will talk today about uploading a React project. One thing to note is I'm not sure how you updated your React. Or I know that there's been some issues with files being too big. It depends on how you created your React file. If you are using the platform and you're using sort of the first part of React, guys, I'll be honest, I don't know why we still have that, because it's a little bit more confusing than helpful when you're dealing with like the create React element sort of thing. If you go straight into this, your first React or create the React app, when you do that, you're going to get this node modules, and that's going to be your big issue, right? You're going to have huge modules. This is a huge file. We're going to go through all this today in depth. So I'm not going to waste our time there, but you also get this get ignore, and this is automatically made for you. And so if you guys have created something not using npx create React app, and you have this upload size issue, it's because you're probably trying to upload your node modules. Again, we're going to talk about get ignore today. But adding this to your get ignore means that whenever you are updating and you are pushing something to GitHub or GitLab, whatever you use, code commit, doesn't matter. When you're trying to do that, you have to push these. And then what this get ignore does is it prevents it from being pushed, because these are massive files. And we'll talk about why in a minute, or in today's lecture. We're going to talk about why that's not necessary and why you don't need to do that. But let's talk about, let's go back to, I created a test, I can't remember what I called it. Test example. So let's CD into test example. Cool. And in here, I've got my daily agenda, my main, and my main PY. Now, if I'm wanting to put something to GitHub, there's a couple steps we're going to have to do. And at first, it's going to feel like a lot. but it's not, I promise. And we will get very, very good at it very, very quickly. You'll just do it over and over and over again. And then I'll show you a little tip and trick on GitHub also will do it for you. So if you don't have access, or if you don't have a GitHub, I would absolutely suggest you download, or not download, but create a GitHub profile. It'd be really important because it is something that even recruiters will use to show basically what are you looking like when you're applying for jobs. This unfortunately is going to be something that they look at. Now, I don't push a ton of stuff to GitHub. I just kind of create stuff and then don't push it. But you've probably seen in all the memes, all this, people who are green and they're writing so much code all the time. It sounds so stupid because in my opinion, that's not indicative if you're a good developer or not. Also because there's other tools and people might work at another company that uses code commit, which is AWS's GitHub, to where you're not pushing to GitHub, but users and recruiters will look at this and say, how much are you actually committing to GitHub? So for my opinion is, as you guys are in this boot camp, you should just be pushing every assignment to GitHub. So that way, when you're looking for jobs, if a recruiter does look at this, does look at your contributions, then you at least can have some green squares. And again, not indicative of it, because you can just upload a basic file every single day and it looks like you've uploaded. It's not indicative at all of your actual coding abilities, but it's just something to do. So once you create a GitHub, here's mine, very basic. My middle name's Cody, and that's what I used to go by. So now I go by Will. So alas, here we are. Now you learn something more about me. So I want to put this on GitHub. And the whole point of GitHub is, one thing I want to do is decouple Git and GitHub. Git is a version control management system, basically. You can think of it as, think about how, I don't know if you guys have worked in like Microsoft Word lately or Google Docs, where you can write something and then you can actually look at the different versions, right? And let's say that you have this great paper and you wrote a paragraph and then you're like, wow, you know what? I've done a lot of stuff and it actually doesn't flow the way it used to flow. I actually just want to go back to how it was, right? I want to kind of get rid of all my work. And instead of going and finding all the spots, you can just go to the version. You can just go to the version that, previously didn't have the changes. Git's the same way. It allows you to sort of even mess with your code, and it's a very, very robust system, but allows you to mess with your code. And in worst case, you break it, you can always revert back and not have any of those changes. So that's what Git is. GitHub is a place that you can actually just host your code. It's just a place that you can put your code and it connects to your Git environment, your Git initialization. And that way people can view your code, you can host it, you can, hosting means that you're able to log in and get your code. If you're on the cloud, you can do a whole bunch of stuff, but there are other ones. So GitHub's not the only one. GitLab is another one. Again, Amazon Code Commit is another one. So it kind of depends up to you. I think there's quite a few. GitHub's absolutely the most popular. So I would say use GitHub because I also really like it. But once you create your profile, you'll be here. So there's two things we have to do. We've got to first, I'm going to initialize, again, Git is different. So I need to initialize my repository. And all a repository means is this is your code, right? This repository is your code. So the way I do that is I say git init. And then when I say git init in this folder, I am initializing code within this. Cool. So it says initialize empty Git repository. Now I've said, hey, I want to keep track of this test example.git, but I don't have anything in there. So what I can do is I say git add space dot. Now the space dot is similar to code space dot. If I just had a file that I wanted to add, I could just say git add space file name, but I want to add everything within there. So I'm going to say add dot. Perfect. Now I'm going to say git status. This isn't necessary, but I like to always check it. And it tells me, okay, cool. Here's all the things, anything that's in green. This is all the things that I've added. Cool. Great. Now, the last thing I have to do, I've added them, but now I have to commit. So what I say is git commit. This -m means I'm going to have a message and we'll see what that message is here in a second. And I'm gonna say first commit. So I say git commit -m first commit. So now I'm gonna run this. Cool, it's created that, and I've now committed that code. Now, what I have to do, so I've done everything on the Git side. Now I've got to connect it to my GitHub. So here I'm going to say this. I'm going to say repository name. I'm going to say MERN test example is an example. You can do a ton of different things. You can make it private. You can make it public. You can add a README. A README is just sort of, if you have like, especially if you're open source, then you can say, okay, this is everything this is about. Here's some code, here's some things, here's how to use this tool. We don't need that. Git ignore, we don't need that right now. And then a license if you're doing a couple different things, but it's not necessary for anything we're doing. You don't even have to put the description. You just have to put a repository name, make it public. And you say create repository. Cool, so we've created our repository. And here's sort of the secret too. If you forget what the first things are, the git init, the git add, the git commit, once you create a repository, they're all here. They just do the add readme, but you could just add, you would just replace readme with space dot, right? And it's done the same thing. So now that we've done, because this is create a new repository, if I look here, it already says that I created a repository, right? Now all I need to do is or push to an existing repository from the command line. So what I need to do is do this guy. I like to copy paste because if you mess this up at all, it can cause a lot of a headache, a huge headache, because then now you've committed to this endpoint that actually doesn't exist because maybe you had a typo. So I always copy these. Come here. I just press enter. Great. Git branch. And then this one I say git push u origin main. Perfect. It does it. Now, this last one, what it does is it says git push u origin main, saying I want to push to this repository. Let's go ahead and add all that code that I just added. So now if I refresh this, we get to see all that code. And remember that message that we had, that's right here. That's right here. So what's nice about it is as you're building out code and you wanted to say added CSS, or you did X, Y, or Z, added new class, you could just put that there, and it helps if you're working with a team. It helps people know what is the most recent thing that we've done. And also what exactly, if I want to go to the last commit where you added CSS and we want to change it, how do I do that? And that's it. Now it's there. Now, if I were to change anything about it, I don't actually have to do the entire process over again. All I have to say is git add, and I add what I want. I say git commit, and I just say, what did I change? Like added CSS. And then all I have to say is git push. And then once I say git push, it'll push the new code up to this. So for example, let's go. Let's see. If I say, what's 458? Yeah, I'm gonna CD into Feb 23, MERN. Okay, so something to note is today we've added week 3. I've already created. I go back. I've already created this, right? So this repository is week 1. Week 1, lecture 1, and then I have lecture 2. Now we have 2 and 3. So what I can do is I can just say git add, git status. And now you can see I've done a whole bunch of things. I created a React app. I've added a whole bunch of stuff. Now I can say git commit -m, created React app and added week 2 and 3 folders. Cool, I've committed it. Now I just say git push. Because I've already done this process. Now, if I come here and I refresh, you can see it already adds this. And then it has my new thing. So now every single time I'm adding to this, I just have to do add, I do commit, and then I do push. Okay. We sort of went up to the wire. Any questions on that? And I'll take a quick break and we'll get started. Does that make sense? Just put a 1 in the chat if that sort of made sense and that helped.